A millionaire cheated on his wife and was arrested. Months later, he can't believe what she's done. The hum of slow-moving cars and the constant murmur of Mexico City served as the backdrop to Mia's hurried steps through the streets of Coyoacán. Known for its artistic ambiance and colorful houses, the neighborhood was where one of the young woman's greatest passions came to life: singing. Every day, after finishing her school tasks, she made her way determinedly to the small music school housed in an old mansion, where her dream of becoming a singer was slowly taking shape, even though she remained shy and uncertain. Mia was only 16, but there was a spark in her eyes that told of someone who knew exactly what she wanted. Her love for music had begun in childhood, when her father used to turn on the radio during Sunday mornings, filling the house with traditional Mexican melodies. But it was during her lessons with Professor Ava, a woman in her 40s with a proud posture and infinite patience, that Mia truly believed she could turn that dream into something bigger. Ava, who had graduated from the local conservatory, was serious and disciplined in her approach, yet always infused her teaching with a humanity that won the hearts of her students. Breathing, Mia. It doesn't matter how badly you want to hit that note. If your breath isn't right, the sound won't come as it should, she would say, her gentle hand resting on Mia's shoulder. Posture too. Your body is your instrument, and you must treat it with respect. Mia followed each instruction meticulously, repeating exercises until her voice began to sound clearer and more confident. Still, the higher notes were a challenge that often made her doubt herself. You're making progress, Mia. Remember, patience. Every voice has its time to bloom, Ava encouraged, noticing even the smallest victories in the young girl, even in moments of frustration. At home, the family's financial situation was a daily struggle. Olivia, Mia's mother, kept the household afloat with a small sewing workshop set up in the living room, where she made custom clothes. Singing lessons were a luxury they could barely afford, but Olivia knew that it was one of the few things that made her daughter truly happy. When it came time to renew payment for the lessons, and they didn't have enough money, Olivia gathered her courage and approached Ava with a proposal. Professor, I know Mia loves these lessons and she would never forgive me if she had to stop. I don't have the full amount this month, but if you accept, I can sew something in exchange. A dress, a garment, anything you need, Olivia suggested, holding her breath as she waited for an answer. Ava, who recognized the potential and passion in her young student, smiled warmly. You're offering me a gift, Olivia. I'd love to have something made by your hands. Consider it a deal. With that, the singing lessons continued, but they became more than just vocal training for Mia. They became a refuge, a moment of relief amid the growing family and financial tensions at home. The relationship between Mia and Ava also evolved unexpectedly. Between breaks in their rehearsals, Ava would share stories of her youth and how she had faced challenges to pursue her passion for music. There was a time when I wanted to quit, Mia. But if there's one thing music has taught me, it's that it transforms us from the inside out. It's a way to resist, to find strength where we didn't even know it existed, Ava confided during an afternoon that was particularly difficult for the young girl. These conversations built a bond that transcended the teacher-student relationship, bringing the two closer together, like mother and daughter, united by shared dreams and struggles. The night had already fallen when Mia arrived home, carrying a backpack that felt lighter than her thoughts. The echo of her singing exercises still lingered in her mind, but her enthusiasm began to fade as she crossed the threshold of the small apartment. As usual, Ethan, her father, was not home. Only Olivia was in the kitchen, bent over the old wooden table, adjusting the hem of a dress with near-automatic precision. A nostalgic, romantic song played on the radio, filling the silence that to Mia was deafening. "Mama, has Dad still not arrived?" she asked, unable to hide her disappointment. Olivia glanced briefly at her daughter, her tired, serene face betraying little emotion, and responded in a muffled voice, "No, Mika, he's still working. He must be on the last shift." That phrase, though routine, struck Mia like a painful reminder of her father's constant absence. Ethan was a bus driver, caught in the chaos of Mexico City's traffic. His long, exhausting routine seemed like a machine that consumed him slowly. He arrived home late, often too tired to exchange more than a few words with either Olivia or Mia. That night, Mia decided to wait for him, even if it meant prolonging her own exhaustion. It was past 11 when Ethan finally came through the door. His uniform was wrinkled, and the expression on his face held a mix of fatigue and guilt. "Good evening," he said, offering a quick smile that barely concealed the weight of a full day's work. Mia was sitting on the couch waiting for him. "Hi, Dad," she said, her tone softer than she intended. Ethan seemed surprised to see her still awake. "Shouldn't you be asleep? You've got school tomorrow." "I just wanted to see you," Mia replied, but Ethan was already heading for the bedroom, muttering something about taking a quick shower before bed. A knot formed in Mia's throat. The distance between them was something she was starting to no longer tolerate. The next day, during a makeshift dinner of rice, beans, and tortillas, Ethan barely had time to eat before his phone vibrated on the table. He sighed deeply when he saw his boss's name on the screen. Olivia watched him with concern as he picked up the call. The conversation was brief, but full of tension. Ethan hung up and ran a hand through his dark hair, now showing some grey strands. "They want me to work overtime tomorrow," he said, as though already expecting criticism. "Ethan, you need rest. You're always exhausted and you barely have time for us," Olivia argued, her voice controlled but firm. He shook his head in frustration. "And what do you want me to do? The bills don't pay themselves. If I don't accept, they can replace me in a second." Olivia, trying to lighten the conversation, suggested something she had been wanting to propose for a while. "What if we took a few days off? A short trip to Acapulco? We could breathe a little, leave this weight behind, even if just for a while." Ethan chuckled, but it wasn't out of joy. "A trip? With what money? I can't afford to dream about that right now." Mia, who had been silent until then, couldn't hold back any longer. "Dad, you always have an excuse. There's never time for us, not even for me." The words tumbled out like an avalanche, surprising both Ethan and Olivia. He fell silent for a few seconds, as if trying to absorb the impact. "Don't say that, Mia. You know I work for you." "But you're never here," she shot back, getting up from the table before the tears could fall. Olivia tried to intervene, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "She just misses you," she whispered, but the guilt was already visible in his eyes. The next morning, Ethan decided to try something different. Before leaving for work, he got up earlier and made breakfast. He fried eggs, heated tortillas, and even brewed fresh coffee. When Mia came downstairs, her eyes still swollen from the previous night's crying, she found the table set. "Good morning, Mija," he said, a little shy. "I wanted to do something for us." Mia thanked him, but the pain from the night before still hung between them. Although it was a meaningful gesture, the emotional distance between father and daughter seemed greater than ever. If you're watching this far, I'm sure you're liking it, so I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel. The stifling heat of late afternoon weighed heavily in the small Carter apartment as Ethan entered the door. His face tense and his shoulders hunched, as though he carried the weight of the world on his back. Mia and Olivia, who had been folding pieces from the sewing workshop in the kitchen, stopped immediately when they saw his expression. He dropped his backpack on the floor, and before even sitting down, he announced in a low, bitter tone, "I've been suspended from work." A heavy silence fell over the room. Olivia was the first to react. "Suspended? But why? What happened?" Ethan rubbed his face, clearly exhausted. They say I'm involved in a fraud scheme with the bus fares. They claim I've been a part of it for months." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if telling himself to stay calm. "It's a lie, Olivia. I would never do something like that. You know that." Olivia approached him, placing her hands on his shoulders. "Of course I know, Ethan. But why are they accusing you?" He sighed and opened his eyes, staring at her in desperation. "I think someone needs a scapegoat. The company's in the middle of an investigation, and the manager called me today to say my name's on a list of suspects. I've been suspended while they investigate, but we know how these things go. To them, I'm already guilty." Mia, who had remained silent until then, watched the scene unfold with a mix of concern and disbelief. Seeing her father, whom she had always considered honest and hard-working, accused of something so serious was like watching a nightmare. Unconsciously, she squeezed a piece of fabric she was holding in her hands. "Dad, that's not fair," she protested, her voice breaking. Ethan just shook his head. "I know, daughter, but it doesn't matter to them. What matters is saving the company's reputation." The days that followed were a whirlwind of uncertainty. Without Ethan's income, the bills began to pile up. Olivia, ever determined to keep the family afloat, increased her hours at the sewing workshop. She worked through the nights, her fingers marked by the needles and her back aching from leaning over the sewing machine. Despite all of this, she never let on to Ethan or Mia how tired she was. "We're fine. We just need time to sort everything out," she would say, even though the worries were growing in her mind. Desperate to prove Ethan's innocence, Olivia turned to the help of her friend Chloe, a pragmatic and supportive woman. Chloe suggested a well-known lawyer but warned, "He's not cheap, Olivia, but he's good. If anyone can help Ethan, it's him." Without hesitation, Olivia scheduled a meeting with the lawyer. The office was small, with piles of papers and simple decor, but the man, middle-aged with a keen eye, exuded confidence. After hearing Olivia's story, he agreed to take the case, but the fee for his services made her stomach turn. "I'll figure it out," she said, without hesitation, shaking his hand. As Olivia fought to find solutions, Mia began to feel the impact of the situation on the family's daily life. The atmosphere at home became more tense, and the smiles that had once been frequent on her mother's face were now rare and forced. Even worse, Mia feared that her singing lessons would be one of the first sacrifices to be made because of the financial crisis. That week, while practicing a song in the studio, she couldn't hold back her tears. Ava, her teacher, immediately noticed. "What's going on, Mia?" she asked. After hearing the young girl's fragmented explanation, Ava moved closer and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're strong, Mia, and music can be an escape, but it's also a strength. Don't give up, no matter how difficult it seems." At home, Olivia refused to succumb to hopelessness. Despite all the adversity, she made sure to keep a strong face for Ethan and Mia. One night, while sewing by the dim light of the kitchen lamp, she murmured to herself, "I won't let this family fall apart. We'll get through this, even if I have to move mountains." The night was cold and quiet in Mexico City when Olivia heard the urgent knocks on the door. Her heart raced before she even stood up from the table where she had been sewing. Mia, who had been sitting on the couch with a music book in her lap, looked up, confused by the sudden interruption. When Olivia opened the door, she found one of Ethan's co-workers, breathless and visibly nervous. "Mrs. Olivia, something terrible has happened. Ethan has been arrested." For a moment, the words seemed distant, like an echo. "Arrested?" Olivia repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "But why?" The man explained, rushing through his words, that a police checkpoint had stopped Ethan's bus that afternoon. He'd been taken into custody under accusations of direct involvement in the fraud scheme that had been under investigation. "They took him to the Neza prison," he finished, his eyes filled with sympathy. Mia, upon hearing the news, dropped the book she had been holding. Her mind refused to believe what was happening. "My dad, this can't be true. He didn't do anything wrong," she protested, her voice cracking. Olivia, though stunned, held her daughter's shoulders. "Mia, calm down. We'll figure out what's going on." The next morning, Olivia left the house determined to see Ethan and understand what had happened. When she arrived at the Neza prison, she was met with a cruel barrier of bureaucracy. Documents, authorizations, and long lines made access to her husband almost impossible. When she finally got to see him, the sight of Ethan sitting behind glass in a prison uniform shook her deeply. He seemed smaller, fragile, his eyes filled with shame. "I didn't do anything, Olivia. They're trying to blame me for something I didn't do," he said, his voice heavy with despair. "I believe you," Olivia replied, trying to hide her tears. But deep down, she knew that belief alone wouldn't be enough. They needed proof. They needed a lawyer. Meanwhile, at home, Mia struggled to process what was happening. She had always seen her father as a solid figure, the pillar of the family. Now, seeing him imprisoned shattered all of her certainties. At school, her thoughts wandered, and in singing class, her voice seemed to lose its power. Ava noticed the change and tried to comfort the young girl. "Mia, sometimes we face storms that test us, but don't let this steal your voice. Music can be your strength." Back in the small apartment, Olivia began calculating and reorganizing her life to pay for Ethan's defense. After many sleepless nights, she made a painful decision to sell her oldest sewing machine, a gift from her mother. That machine had an immeasurable sentimental value, but Olivia knew there was no other choice. With the money from the sale, she paid a portion of the lawyer's fees, a gesture that brought immediate relief, but also left an empty space in her heart. The prison visits became a painful routine. With each encounter, Ethan seemed more distant. He blamed himself for putting the family in this situation, even though he knew he wasn't guilty. "Olivia, you shouldn't have sold your machine. I'm not worth that sacrifice," he said one time, looking down, unable to face her. "You are worth it to me and to Mia," Olivia replied, holding his hand firmly through the glass. "And we will get through this together." But even with that promise, tensions began to rise between them. Ethan questioned his own decisions, while Olivia felt overwhelmed and at times frustrated with the burden of carrying the family alone. Small arguments became frequent during the visits, revealing wounds that had once been swept under the rug. Still, Olivia refused to give in to despair. Her focus remained on keeping the family together, even though it was incredibly challenging. Mia, on the other hand, began to notice her mother's extraordinary strength. One evening, after hearing Olivia sob quietly while sewing, the young girl approached and hugged her. "Mom, you're the strongest person I know. We will get Dad out of there, I promise." Olivia looked out the bus window as the mountains of Puebla slowly approached. Next to her, Mia huddled in her seat, her headphones plugged into an old portable radio, trying to block out the noise of the wheels on the uneven road and the weight of a reality that seemed impossible to accept. The move was not a choice, it was a necessity. With Ethan still in prison and the bills piling up like an unbearable burden, Olivia had no option but to accept her Aunt Harper's invitation, a widowed woman who lived in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of Puebla. It was a fresh start, but not the kind that brought relief. It was a fresh start marked by survival. Aunt Harper's house was small and simple, with peeling walls and the constant smell of freshly brewed coffee. The dirt courtyard was a stark contrast to the busy life Mia had known in Mexico City. From the moment they crossed the threshold, the young woman felt as if something inside her had been ripped away. Used to the frantic pace and the singing lessons she loved so much, she now faced an environment that seemed to stand still in time. "It will be just for a while, mija," Olivia said, trying to sound optimistic as she unpacked their few belongings. But even she felt the weight of the uncomfortable silence that filled their new home. Mia struggled to adapt. The calm streets of Puebla, with their almost provincial pace, served as a constant reminder of everything she had left behind. The afternoons that had once been filled with vocal exercises were now spent in solitary walks through the city's central square. She watched the local musicians perform, feeling a pang of envy and longing. At night, alone in the small room she shared with her mother, she often cried quietly, hiding her face in the pillow so Olivia wouldn't see. Meanwhile, Olivia was fighting her own battle. The little money they had barely covered their basic needs, and relying on Aunt Harper's generosity was something she couldn't bear to do for long. One Sunday morning, while walking through the town square, an idea came to her. She saw several women selling tamales and thought, if they can do it, I can too. Olivia decided to start a small business to secure their survival. With the little money she had left, she bought corn, banana leaves, and basic ingredients. She spent the night in the kitchen, with Harper helping, while Mia watched in silence. Even though she was exhausted, Olivia insisted on involving her daughter. "Mija, come learn. You'll see how our tamales will be the best in the city." Reluctant at first, Mia eventually helped wrap the tamales, her fingers learning the repetitive, almost therapeutic movement. In the days that followed, Olivia set up a small table in the central square and began selling. At first, the response was timid, but Olivia's warmth and the quality of her tamales soon caught the attention of the locals. A neighbor, who passed by daily to buy, began bringing in other customers, and before long, she was selling almost everything by noon. The profits were still modest, but enough to ease the most urgent bills. "We're making progress," Olivia would say, more to herself than anyone else. Despite all the difficulties, Olivia made sure to create moments of joy for Mia. On some nights, she would prepare typical dishes like mole poblano and invite Harper to eat with them at the table. During those moments, the small room seemed to come alive, filled with laughter and stories. "I want you to remember these nights, Misha. No matter what happens, we will always have each other," Olivia said while serving dinner. Gradually, the family began to feel the first signs of hope. A neighbor brought over old fabric for Olivia to sew, offering a small payment that, although modest, was accepted with gratitude. Another neighbor, impressed by Olivia's hard work, offered to help improve her stall in the square. These small acts of kindness sparked a glimmer of optimism that had seemed lost. The plaza in Puebla, with its wrought iron benches and trees casting long shadows in the late afternoon, was beginning to feel familiar to Olivia. After weeks of selling tamales, she had started to recognize a few regular faces who passed by to buy her delicacies. But that day, a familiar face from the past appeared among the crowd. "Olivia Carter, is that you?" The voice came from a tall woman with her hair pulled into a neat bun and a wide smile. Olivia paused for a moment, trying to place her. It was Zoe, a childhood friend she hadn't seen in years. "Zoe, I can't believe it," Olivia exclaimed, momentarily letting go of the banana leaf she was holding. The two embraced like old friends, and even without planning it, their conversations stretched on for hours. Zoe shared that she was now managing a small restaurant in town and was impressed by Olivia's determination after hearing about her new tamale business. "You've always been resilient, Olivia. But tell me, how can I help?" In the following days, Zoe kept her promise. Not only did she begin ordering tamales for her restaurant, but she also connected Olivia with local suppliers who could help reduce the cost of ingredients. "Buy directly from them. You'll save a lot of money," Zoe explained one afternoon while watching Olivia prepare the tamale dough. She also suggested that Olivia add new items to the menu, like champurrado, which attracted even more customers. The business began to grow, But the biggest surprise came when Zoe offered Olivia a job as a kitchen helper at the restaurant. "It's only part-time, but the pay is decent and you'll have more stability," Zoe explained. Although hesitant at first, concerned about abandoning the tamale stall, Olivia accepted. For the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of hope amid the chaos that her life had become. Meanwhile, Mia was also undergoing a quiet transformation. The longing for her singing lessons still weighed on her every day, but one afternoon, as she helped Olivia prepare tamales, she began to sing without even realizing it. Her voice, soft and melodic, floated through the small backyard of Aunt Harper's house. A neighbor who was hanging clothes on the nearby clothesline heard and immediately approached. "What a beautiful voice, Mia. You should sing more," she complimented, genuinely enchanted. From that moment on, singing became an escape for Mia. In the late afternoons, she would sit on the porch and let her voice fill the peaceful air of the neighborhood. Neighbors started to stop by to listen, and little by little, her music became a small local attraction. An elderly man who passed by every day with his ice cream cart commented once, "When you sing, girl, it feels like the day gets lighter." Mia, shy as always, thanked the compliments. But deep down, she felt an immense comfort in knowing that her music still had the power to touch people, even far from the studio. Over time, Olivia and Mia began to form deeper connections in their new community. Neighbors who had once been distant figures started to become part of their lives. Mrs. Lilly, an elderly woman who lived on the corner, showed up one morning with a bag of fresh fruit. "For the tamales," she said, asking for nothing in return. Another neighbor, Ryan, a carpenter, offered to fix Olivia's old table, which was nearly falling apart. The kindness of those around them made Olivia and Mia feel, for the first time in months, that they weren't alone. Although life was still far from perfect, signs of stability were starting to emerge. The part-time job at the restaurant provided a steady income, and the tamale business continued to thrive, now with loyal customers. Mia, for her part, began to dream again about her singing, holding on to her small performances as a reminder that, despite the struggles, there was still space for her dreams. The work at the restaurant and the tamale sales had brought some relief to Olivia, but Ethan's absence remained a constant shadow over her life. Every time she closed her eyes at night, the image of her husband behind the glass at the prison haunted her. She knew he wasn't perfect, but she was also certain that he wasn't a criminal. The weight of proving that, however, seemed overwhelming. Everything changed on a rainy afternoon, when Zoe, the friend who had been so supportive since their arrival in Puebla, walked into the restaurant kitchen with a worried expression. "Olivia, I think I found something that might interest you," she said, handing her a thick envelope. Inside were copies of documents mentioning suspicious transactions and signatures that, at first glance, seemed to implicate Ethan. But as Olivia examined the papers more closely, she noticed a discrepancy. The signatures belonged to Ethan, but the handwriting was not his. She knew her husband's handwriting as well as her own. "This isn't his," Olivia murmured, more to herself than to Zoe. "They're using Ethan's name to cover for someone else." Zoe frowned. And who would that someone be? The question echoed in Olivia's mind. She knew that finding the answer would be the key to freeing Ethan, but uncovering the truth meant facing powerful people. Meanwhile, Mia, who had been overhearing the conversations from a distance, began to question the situation in a different light. "What if Dad isn't so innocent after all?" she asked one evening while helping her mother fold napkins in the restaurant. The question hit Olivia like a blow. "Why would you say that, Mia?" Olivia's voice trembled as she tried to contain the pain and indignation. Mia hesitated but continued. He never talked much about his work. What if he's hiding something? How can we be so sure?" Olivia took a deep breath, putting the napkins aside. She sat down next to her daughter and held her hands. "Mia, your father was never a perfect man, but he is honest. He's always worked hard to support us. That's what I know." Despite her attempt to reassure her daughter, Mia's doubts remained, quietly growing. Her father's prolonged absence and the burden it placed on the family made her question what she had once considered unquestionable. Days later, Olivia received a visit from a lawyer Zoe had recommended. He examined the documents she had received and confirmed her suspicions. The evidence against Ethan had been fabricated. They clearly used his name as a front. "Your husband was made the fall guy to protect someone higher up," the lawyer explained. However, he also warned that the evidence was still flimsy and that convincing the authorities would be a challenge. "We need something more solid." Olivia found herself facing an agonizing dilemma. Investing time and resources into proving Ethan's innocence meant exposing the family to even more risks and uncertainties. On the other hand, giving up the fight meant accepting that he would remain guilty in the eyes of the law and society. That night, lying in bed alone, she reflected on the choice. Staring at the ceiling of the small room she shared with Mia, she murmured to herself, "I can't abandon Ethan, but I also can't destroy everything we've built here." The next morning, as she walked to the restaurant, a decision began to take shape in her mind. She would seek justice, but cautiously. "I'll fight for Ethan, but not at the cost of our survival," she confided to Zoe later. "I need to be practical. My priority is still Mia." That evening, while preparing tamales with her daughter, Olivia made a silent promise to herself and to her family. "I won't rest until I prove he's innocent," she thought, watching Mia softly hum an old song Ethan used to play on the radio. That small melody brought an unexpected comfort, a reminder that despite everything, they were still a family. And somehow, they would find their way back to each other. The sound of the doorbell echoed through Olivia's small house, interrupting the afternoon silence. She was in the kitchen, preparing ingredients for the tamales, while Mia reviewed a music notebook in the living room. "I'll answer, Mom," the young girl said, putting her book aside. When she opened the door, she froze. It was Ethan. He stood there with a look of regret in every line of his face, carrying a small suitcase and his shoulders slightly slumped, as if the weight of the past months was visibly carried in his body. "Hi, Mia," he said, his voice quiet and hesitant. It took Mia a moment to respond, her mind caught in the whirlwind of emotions her father stirred within her. "Dad, you're here." He nodded. I was released. They didn't have enough proof to keep me there." Olivia appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. The moment she saw Ethan, her face hardened. She knew this moment would come, but she wasn't ready for it. "What do you want, Ethan?" she asked, her voice firmer than she had expected. He took a deep breath, trying to control the emotion threatening to spill over. "I want to come back home. I want to try to fix things." His words hung in the air, charged with a tension that seemed to grow with every passing second. Olivia looked at him with a mix of exhaustion and distrust. "Come back home? Do you think it's that simple?" "Ethan, I spent months holding this family together while you were in prison, and now you show up here and expect everything to go back to normal?" "I know I made mistakes," he said, his voice choked. "I know I failed you both, but I want to try. I want to be the husband and father you deserve." Mia, who had been silent until then, felt the tears well up in her eyes. Seeing her father so vulnerable stirred something in her, but the pain of his absence during the most difficult times of their lives was still a raw wound. "Why now, Dad?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you fight for us before?" Ethan lowered his head, unable to respond immediately. "I don't have a good enough excuse, daughter, but I want to change." Despite her initial resistance, Olivia agreed to let him stay for a few days, but with a clear condition. "This doesn't mean I trust you, Ethan. And I want you to know that my priority is Mia. I won't let anyone, including you, hurt my daughter, emotionally or in any other way." In the following days, Ethan tried to redeem himself in every way he could. He helped Olivia with the tamale sales in the square, carried the heavier boxes, and even offered suggestions to improve the business. Some people looked at him curiously as he worked beside his wife, but Ethan didn't care. "I need to show that I'm here to help," he repeated to himself like a mantra. Meanwhile, Mia continued to struggle with her emotions. Seeing her father try to get close was comforting, but it didn't erase the pain of his absence when she had needed him the most. One day, as she was singing alone in the backyard, Ethan approached and listened in silence. When she finished, he clapped softly. "Your voice is beautiful, Mia," he said, moved. "I always knew you had a gift." The young girl looked at him, surprised. It was the first time in a long while that hearing a compliment from her father brought a genuine smile to her face. Amid this process of reconciliation, Olivia received an unexpected visit from the local lawyer who had helped them in the past. He had heard about Ethan's release and decided to offer his help once more, this time for free. "It's not fair that he lives with this stain on his name. If you want, I can review the case and see if we can find something that truly proves his innocence," he said firmly. Olivia hesitated, but she knew that the truth still needed to come out. Although Olivia and Mia's trust in Ethan was still being rebuilt, his small gestures began to make a difference. A breakfast carefully prepared, a sincere compliment, or a moment of shared silence were the first steps to rebuilding something that had seemed lost. Olivia was exhausted. The tamale sales and her work at the restaurant had drained all of her energy, but that night, something compelled her to organize the old belongings tucked away in the small closet of her bedroom. As she sifted through boxes, she came across a worn envelope hidden among accounting papers and old receipts. Her heart raced, and curiosity overcame her fatigue. When she opened the envelope, she found documents bearing the logo of the former transportation company where Ethan had worked. The pages were covered with numbers and signatures, some of which attributed direct authorizations for changes in bus fares to Ethan. But something seemed off. Olivia knew her husband's handwriting as well as her own, and immediately realized that the signatures weren't his. Flipping through one of the pages, she found handwritten notes, clear instructions and adjustments that pointed to Victor as the mastermind behind a scheme to profit at the expense of the drivers. With a heavy heart, she read and reread the documents, her anger growing with each line. There was no doubt Victor had used Ethan as a scapegoat, a disposable piece in his web of corruption. "He knew exactly what he was doing," Olivia murmured, feeling rage bubbling in her chest. The next morning, without wasting time, she took the documents to the lawyer who had been assisting the family. He carefully examined each sheet, frowning as he analyzed the details. "These papers confirm what we suspected, Olivia. Victor manipulated the records to protect himself. Ethan was used to divert attention, but we need more evidence and witnesses if we want to take this to court." Determined to seek justice, Olivia decided to confront Victor. She knew where to find him. A large office in the city center, decorated with an ostentation that reflected his arrogance. When she entered the office, she was met with suspicious glances, but she didn't hesitate. "I need to speak with Victor. It's urgent," she said firmly. When she entered his office, she found him sitting in a leather chair, reviewing papers with no sense of urgency. He looked up with a forced smile. "Olivia Carter, what do I owe this honor?" Without hesitation, Olivia placed the documents on his desk. "You knew all along that Ethan was innocent, and now I have proof." Victor glanced at the papers quickly, and the smile faded. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Proof?" he said with a tone of disdain. "You think these sheets are enough to bring me down? They're just papers, Olivia. Papers that can disappear easily." The threatening tone didn't intimidate her. "If you think I'll back down, you're wrong. I will fight to expose you, even if it's the last thing I do," she replied, her voice steady. That evening, when Olivia returned home, she found a crumpled note stuck to the door. The paper was wrinkled, and the handwritten message was straightforward. "Give up, or you and your family will suffer the consequences." A chill ran down her spine, but she knew that retreating was not an option. Ethan, Mia, and the truth were more important than any threat. Olivia shared the note with the lawyer and decided she needed allies to face this challenge. She began speaking with neighbors and friends, explaining what she had discovered. Many were willing to help, especially Mason, a former co-worker of Ethan who had been unjustly fired by Victor. "I always suspected he was manipulating everything. I have some copies of old reports that might be useful," Mason said, handing Olivia a small stack of papers. As she gathered evidence and testimonies, Olivia knew there would be obstacles, but her determination only grew. During a meeting with the lawyer and some allies, she looked at everyone and said, "Victor thought he could destroy our lives without consequences, but he'll find out that he underestimated the strength of a family willing to fight." With the first steps of the legal battle beginning, Olivia knew the path ahead would be dangerous and full of uncertainty. Still, the idea of justice kept her standing tall. The morning was calm and clear in Puebla, with the distant sound of vendors calling out to customers in the plaza and the smell of fresh bread coming from the corner bakery. Mia had left early to buy ingredients for the tamales, something she did frequently since Olivia had focused her energy on the legal battle against Victor. With her basket on her arm and headphones in her ears, she walked through the market, distracted, humming a song that had been stuck in her head for days. As she picked out some ripe tomatoes, she didn't notice the black car parked across the street. Two men stepped out discreetly, their hats obscuring parts of their faces. As soon as Mia put the tomatoes in her basket and turned to leave, she felt a firm hand grab her arm. "Hey, what's this?" she asked, startled, but she didn't have time to react. One of the men placed a cloth over her mouth, and in seconds she was unconscious. At home, Olivia grew worried, as Mia hadn't returned by the time she expected. Her daughter usually moved quickly and always told her if something was delayed. The unease grew into panic when the phone rang. It wasn't the usual number. When she answered, a deep, threatening voice came through the line. "If you want to see your daughter alive, drop the case. This is your only chance." For a moment, Olivia's world seemed to stop. Her mind spun between fear and fury. "Who are you? Where is my daughter?" she shouted, but the call ended abruptly. Her hands trembled, but her heart told her it could only be the work of Victor. He had shown what he was capable of, but now he had crossed every line. Desperate, Olivia ran to Zoe's house. When she arrived, she was out of breath and almost couldn't explain what had happened. "They've taken Mia," she said, tears streaming down her face. Zoe embraced her friend, trying to offer some calm. "We'll call the police. We'll gather the neighbors. You're not alone." As they waited for the authorities, Olivia's small house began to fill with neighbors and friends. Mason, the former co-worker of Ethan, was one of the first to arrive. "If he thinks he can intimidate us, he's wrong," Mason said. Others offered ideas, and a network of solidarity began to take shape. Everyone wanted to help in some way, whether by providing information, watching the streets, or offering moral support to Olivia. The police, though hesitant to confront someone as influential as Victor, could not ignore the commotion the case had stirred in the community. Based on eyewitness reports from those who had seen the black car in the market, the officers began tracking down potential hiding places for the kidnappers. The wait was agonizing, but Olivia didn't give in. She called the number she had received earlier, demanding to speak with the kidnappers. "Don't touch my daughter," she said, her voice full of rage. "I'm willing to negotiate, but I want proof she's alive." A few hours later, a video arrived on her phone. Mia appeared in a dark room, scared but showing no signs of serious injury. "Mom, please help me," the young girl said, tears in her eyes, before the video cut off. Olivia felt the ground slip from under her, but her resolve only grew stronger. "They won't win," she told Zoe. "I won't give up, not on Mia and not on justice." By dusk, the police had located the vehicle used in the kidnapping, parked near an abandoned factory. With the help of the neighbors, who blocked the streets to prevent any escape, the officers organized a quick and precise operation. Olivia insisted on accompanying them despite protests. She wanted to be there when everything ended. The moment of the rescue was tense. The kidnappers were armed and hesitated to release Mia, but with the police surrounding the place and the neighbors shouting outside, they eventually surrendered. When Olivia finally saw her daughter running toward her, the tears fell uncontrollably. "Mom!" Mia shouted, throwing herself into her arms. "I knew you'd come!" Back at home, the relief was mixed with trauma. Mia was safe, but the emotional scars were deep. Olivia, still holding her daughter's hand before they went to bed, made a promise. "I'll never let anything like this happen to you again, Mija, and I'll take down Victor. He will never hurt our family again." The days following Mia's rescue were a mix of relief and determination for the Carter family. The impact of the kidnapping only strengthened Olivia's resolve to finally expose Victor once and for all. The lawyer, now more invested than ever, intensified his investigation. During a meeting in the small office at Zoe's restaurant, he presented something that would change the course of the case. "We managed to access documents that compromise Victor. Falsified contracts and financial reports confirm that he used Ethan's name to cover up his own embezzlement." Olivia flipped through the papers, feeling a mixture of anger and relief. There it was, the truth she had been seeking for months. Among the evidence were testimonies from 2 former employees of the transportation company. Both had been unjustly fired and were willing to share everything they knew. "This is a breakthrough, Olivia," the lawyer said, "but we still need Ethan's testimony to strengthen the case. He was at the center of it all, and he could be the missing piece." However, Ethan was hesitant. Sitting at the kitchen table next to Olivia, he clasped his hands, as if wrestling with his own decision. "If I testify against Victor, he could come after you again," he said, glancing at Mia, who was in the background practicing her music. "I won't put our family at risk again." Olivia, with the patience that only she seemed to have, moved closer to her husband. "Ethan, he already put our family at risk. He destroyed us, but we're still standing. If you don't fight now, he will keep doing this to other people. This is our chance to take him down." Ethan looked into his wife's eyes, seeing the unwavering determination that had always inspired him. He knew he couldn't shy away from this responsibility. Meanwhile, Mia found a way to help in her own way. With the support of the neighbors, she organized a small performance in the central plaza, where she would sing to raise funds for the legal expenses. It was the first time she had sung in public since her life had been turned upside down. When she stepped onto the makeshift stage, her hands trembled, but when she looked toward her mother and father in the audience, she found the courage she needed. Her voice filled the plaza, soft and full of emotion, captivating everyone who listened. When she finished, the applause was so loud that Mia had to hold back tears. The event raised more than Olivia had expected, but more importantly, it solidified the community's support for the family's cause. Some people began sharing the Carter story on social media, and the news reached a small local newspaper. A reporter, intrigued by the story, approached Olivia for an interview. "People need to know what Victor has done to you," he said. Although she was reluctant at first, Olivia knew that exposing their story was an essential step to apply pressure on the authorities. The article was published prominently, showing Olivia as a resilient and brave woman who fought against a powerful man to protect her family. The piece included testimonies from neighbors, Ethan's colleagues, and even a snippet from Mia's performance, highlighting how the family had found strength in their unity. The story garnered so much attention that other newspapers began to pick it up, amplifying the pressure on Victor. Olivia's courage began to inspire other women in similar situations. During a visit to the market, a woman approached her, holding her hand tightly. "You gave me the courage to fight for what's right. Thank you," she said, tears in her eyes. These words renewed Olivia's spirit. She knew her fight wasn't just for Ethan, but for all the families Victor had harmed. The courtroom was imposing, with tall stone walls and a silence that seemed to absorb every breath of tension. Olivia, sitting next to Ethan and their lawyer, held her gaze firmly, but her hands, resting in her lap, betrayed her nervousness. Ethan, on the other hand, carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, especially when he saw Victor walk in through the grand wooden door, flanked by a team of lawyers who exuded confidence. The man, impeccably dressed, shot a cold smile toward the Carter family, as though reminding everyone present of his power. The first days of the trial were grueling. Victor's defense was focused on distorting the facts, claiming that Ethan had full autonomy to make decisions at the company and that any wrongdoing was solely his responsibility. Victor's lawyers used polite but loaded language, portraying Ethan as a weak, opportunistic man. Ethan, seated in the witness box, took deep breaths before each answer, trying to maintain his composure. Meanwhile, Olivia observed everything closely. Their lawyer did everything he could to expose the inconsistencies in Victor's arguments, using the documents they had found as proof of his manipulation. Yet despite the progress, it still felt like it wasn't enough. "We need something more solid," the lawyer murmured to Olivia during a break. "Something that can't be refuted." Outside the courtroom, Mia was fighting her own emotional battle. Watching the trial was too much for her. The cold, calculated words of the defense and the unjust accusations against her father felt like an unbearable weight. To find some peace, she took refuge in her singing lessons, where her voice seemed to be the only place she could express the whirlwind of emotions inside her. Her friends, moved by the situation, supported her constantly, helping her stay calm. The turning point in the trial came on the penultimate day when an unexpected witness was called by the prosecution. Mason, Ethan's former colleague, had found a former trusted employee of Victor, a man named Jack, who had worked closely with the businessman for years before being unjustly fired. Jack arrived at the court with a box full of old records and a serious expression. "I worked alongside Victor for years. I know exactly how he operated and how he used people like Ethan to cover up his frauds," Jack declared firmly. He presented documents that corroborated Ethan's story and detailed the embezzlement scheme run by Victor. Among the evidence were emails and internal records that showed direct orders from the businessman to manipulate fares and falsify financial reports. The courtroom fell silent as the evidence was displayed. Victor, who had maintained his arrogant posture up until then, began to show signs of discomfort, shifting uneasily in his chair. Jack's testimony shifted the balance of the case. Ethan's lawyer seized the moment to consolidate their arguments, while Victor's defense seemed lost, unable to refute the new evidence. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he stood up with determination. He looked at the judge, the jury, and his family before beginning. "I am not a perfect man," he admitted, his voice steady, "but I have always worked honestly to provide for my family. I never participated in any fraudulent scheme. And now, thanks to this evidence, I hope the truth will finally be heard." The verdict was announced the following day. Victor was found guilty of fraud and extortion, and his conviction brought a collective sigh of relief throughout the courtroom. Ethan, on the other hand, was declared innocent, regaining the dignity that had been stolen from him. Olivia tightly held his hand, tears flowing down her face as Mia rushed over to hug them. Outside, neighbors and friends were waiting to celebrate the victory. Despite the relief, the Carter family knew that the road to rebuilding their lives was still long. But in that moment, they felt that the worst was behind them. "Finally, justice has been served," Olivia said with a shy smile, filled with hope. The house was located on a quiet street in Puebla, with simple white walls and a small garden that Olivia soon began to tend with great enthusiasm. It wasn't large, but for the Carter family it meant more than just a roof over their heads. It symbolized a new beginning, earned after months of struggle and with the help of the community and the compensation they finally received after the legal battle against Victor. When Olivia crossed the threshold for the first time, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time in a long while, she was building something solid for her family. Mia helped unpack the boxes, stopping now and then to explore the corners of the house. The room that would now be hers was small, but it had a window with a view of the garden. "Mum, can I put my sheet music here?" she asked, pointing to a small wooden table she had found in the room. Olivia nodded with a smile. "Of course, Mija. This space is yours. I want you to make it a place where your dreams can grow." Ethan, for his part, focused on small repairs around the house. He painted the walls of the living room, fixed a faucet that had been dripping endlessly, and even made a shelf for Mia's room. He didn't say much while he worked, but his effort was clear. Ethan knew he had to do more than just speak to rebuild the trust of Olivia and Mia. At night, when they all sat down to eat, he was the first to get up and serve the family, a gesture that, though simple, carried great meaning. "Thank you for giving me this chance," he would say from time to time, looking at Olivia, who still maintained some distance, but was slowly beginning to allow herself to open up. Mia, meanwhile, saw her passion for music gain new life. One afternoon, while practicing her favorite song in the plaza, she was approached by a group of young people organizing a regional singing competition. "You have an amazing voice. You should enter," said one of the organizers. Initially hesitant, Mia shared the opportunity with her mother, who encouraged her without hesitation. "You should try, Mija. This is your moment." The days leading up to the competition were filled with rehearsals. Ethan even improvised a small stage in the backyard so Mia could practice her performances. On the day of the event, the central plaza was packed. Olivia and Ethan sat in the front row, nervous and emotional, while Mia took the stage. She closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and began to sing. Her voice filled the space, emotional and precise, captivating the audience. When she finished, the silence was followed by thunderous applause. Mia not only won the grand prize, but also received invitations to perform at local events, a significant step toward her dream of becoming a professional singer. In the weeks that followed, the family began to create new traditions that strengthened their bond. Family dinners, where each person shared something positive from their day, became moments of unity. One evening, Olivia suggested organizing an event to thank the neighbors and friends who had supported them during the most difficult times. Ethan, without hesitation, took responsibility for preparing the tamales, while Mia decided to sing as a way of giving back. On the day of the event, the backyard of their new house was filled with people. Neighbors, friends, and even acquaintances who had heard the Carter story showed up to celebrate. Olivia, holding the microphone, thanked everyone with tears in her eyes. "You didn't just help us weather a storm, you taught us what it means to have a community." Applauded by all, she passed the microphone to Mia, who once again enchanted everyone with her voice. That night, As they cleaned the yard together after the party, Ethan said in a moved tone, "This house, this new beginning, it only happened because of you, Olivia." She looked at him and replied with a shy smile, "It happened because we never gave up." The golden morning light filled the simple but cozy living room of the Carter family's new home. Ethan, sitting at the table with a newspaper in his hands, wore an expression that flickered between hope and caution. Since being acquitted in the trial, he had been looking for work opportunities, but the months of uncertainty and the prejudice he faced as someone who had once been accused of a crime still haunted him. It was then that his eyes fell on a job listing in a local transportation company. They were hiring a supervisor, someone with experience in the field. Ethan hesitated for a moment before showing the ad to Olivia. "Do you think I should try?" he asked, his voice full of insecurity. Olivia looked at him with firm determination and a supportive smile. "Of course you should, Ethan. You have years of experience, and no one better than you to show that you deserve a second chance." Motivated by her words, Ethan prepared his best suit and went to the interview. A few days later, he received the news that he had been hired. It was a position that not only acknowledged his experience, but also offered a chance to rebuild his self-esteem. On his first day at work, he returned home more confident, his shoulders squared and his energy renewed. Meanwhile, Olivia was also reaping the rewards of her persistence. The small tamale cart, which had once been an improvised solution, had now become an extension of her identity. She spent her mornings at the plaza in Puebla, surrounded by customers who came from afar to buy her famous mole tamales and champurrado. Many stayed to chat, drawn not only by the food, but by Olivia's warm smile and her willingness to listen to their stories. "You're an inspiration," one customer said one morning as she paid for her tamales. Olivia smiled in return, grateful for every small step forward. Mia, for her part, continued to shine in the world of music. Since the regional competition, her name had started to circulate in local circles, and she was now receiving invitations to sing at parties and community events. Each performance was a step toward her dream, but it also brought new challenges. One day, as she was preparing for an upcoming event, she had a moment of doubt. "What if I mess up? What if people don't like it?" she asked her mother, trying to hide her nervousness. Olivia approached her and held her hands. "Mia, you have something special. Your voice comes from the heart, and that's what touches people. It doesn't matter if you make a small mistake. What matters is that you're sharing something real." Olivia's words not only comforted Mia, but also reinforced the essential role that her mother played as her emotional mentor. Weeks went by, and with financial and emotional stability finally beginning to settle in, the family found space for moments of joy. Ethan suggested a trip to the historic center of Puebla, and Olivia and Mia readily agreed. Together, they explored the cobblestone streets, visited the cathedral, and tried traditional sweets from one of the city's famous shops. Mia even insisted on taking a photo of them in front of a colorful mural. It was a simple day, but one filled with laughter and conversations that seemed to fill the emptiness left by the hardships of the past. Each week, these moments of unity became more frequent. Ethan made a point of taking Olivia for coffee in the plaza on his days off, and Mia enjoyed including her parents in her performances, always reserving special places for them. The family bond, once strained, now felt stronger than ever. On one of those quiet afternoons, as they all sat together in the backyard, laughing about something silly Mia had said, Olivia felt a wave of gratitude and peace. The journey hadn't been easy, but they were finally where they needed to be, together, overcoming the scars of the past with love and determination. The nights in the Carter family's new home were different now. Dinner, which had once been marked by tense silences, had transformed into a time of light-hearted conversations, laughter, and sharing stories. That night, as they sat around the table, Mia opened an old photo album that Olivia had kept with care. "Look at this," she said, pointing to an old picture of Ethan holding her in his arms when she was just a baby. "You looked so young, Dad." Ethan smiled shyly while Olivia looked at him with a gleam in her eyes. "I was. And despite everything, I've always been a dedicated father," she said, surprising herself with the honesty of the statement. Ethan lowered his head in silent gratitude. "I didn't always make the best decisions," he responded, "but I've learned that honesty and unity are the only things that truly hold a family together." Olivia smiled and added, "And mutual support. If there's one thing the last few years have taught me, it's that we only managed to get through everything because we were together, even in the hardest times." As Mia listened to her parents reflect, she realized something she had never considered before. Her music, which had always been her refuge, had become a source of unity for her family. "I think my music helped you both too, didn't it?" she asked, a mix of curiosity and emotion in her voice. Ethan and Olivia exchanged glances and nodded in agreement. "Yes, Mija," Olivia replied. "Your music brought joy when everything seemed dark, not just to us, but to everyone who heard you." Inspired by this, Mia began to wonder how she could use her talent to do more. The following week, she accepted an invitation to perform at a local daycare, where she sang for a group of children. The smiles on their faces as they listened were enough to convince Mia that her music had a greater purpose. She decided she wanted to use it to inspire and help others, just as it had helped her own family. While Mia found new ways to shine, Olivia also became a symbol of resilience in her community. One day, during a fair in the plaza, she was invited to share her story at a small local event. Nervous but determined, Olivia took the stage and spoke about the battles she had faced, from Ethan's trial to the sleepless nights selling tamales. "I thought about giving up many times," she admitted, "but every time I looked at my daughter and my husband, I knew I had to keep going. If I can do it, you can too." Olivia's words resonated with so many women in the audience that, after the event, many approached her to share their own stories and seek inspiration. Gradually, she became something of a mentor in the community, encouraging other mothers to fight for their dreams and their families. As Olivia blossomed into a leader and Ethan regained his confidence as a supervisor, the bond between them also grew stronger. Small gestures like Ethan preparing coffee or Olivia adjusting the collar of his shirt before work began to rebuild a love that had seemed lost. "You remind me of why we fell in love," Ethan said one evening, while helping Olivia close the restaurant she now managed. She smiled, tilting her head. "And you remind me that everyone deserves a second chance." Life became a balance between hard work and celebration. The family often organized dinners with neighbors or took trips around the city, exploring markets and museums. One Sunday, they decided to visit Cholula to see the famous pyramid and the stunning view of the Popocatépetl volcano. "This place is magical," said Mia as she took photos with her phone. "Just like us," Olivia responded, pulling Ethan in for a selfie with her daughter. However, the biggest milestone for Mia was yet to come. After months of dedication and rehearsals, she received the news that she had been accepted into a prestigious conservatory in Mexico City. The joy overflowed in the Carter home, but it also came with tears of emotion. "It's going to be hard to let you go," Ethan admitted, his eyes misty, "but I know you're ready." As Mia prepared for the move, Olivia also saw her own dream grow. The small tamale cart had evolved into a modest but busy restaurant where loyal customers came not just for the food, but for the warmth of the owner. Ethan, meanwhile, began using his experience to train new drivers, promoting ethical and safe practices in his work. the family decided it was time to celebrate their accomplishments. They planned a trip to Oaxaca, something they had long wanted to do but had always seemed out of reach. As they packed their bags, they laughed and joked about all the places they would visit. On the night before the trip, while gazing at their home in silence, Olivia felt a wave of gratitude. They had weathered a storm, but now they were stronger. Resilience and love had paved the way for new beginnings, and the future gleamed with promises.